should coffee be priced differently? For sure. But the problem is it's like being in the ocean with the tide pulling you straight out into the ocean. Don't try to swim against the current. You're going to drown. You are there. It is a capitalistic world that is happening, and that's how coffee is priced. And little companies like mine have no say in that. So
do you build a different strategy?
To get out, you swim sideways.
Right, exactly.
You look for alternatives.
Right. The introduction to regenerative coffee farming workshops are now available on demand in English, Spanish and Portuguese. For coffee producers, the workshop is available for just $10, and for everyone else it's $20. Led by our incredible professors, the workshop is packed with practical knowledge and strategies to help coffee farmers and the entire coffee industry adapt to the challenges of climate change, rising costs and market demands. If you're a business owner, this workshop is a great and affordable way to inform your employees about the challenges ahead while also supporting Mapper Forward. Head to mapperforward.coffee/workshops or click the link in the description to purchase the on-demand version and start your journey towards a more sustainable coffee future today. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and we are privileged to have George Howell from George Howell Coffee on the podcast for episode 2 of this 5-part series, where we are doing our annual series with George, The Coffee Industry According to George Howell, the 2025 edition. This is our 3rd edition, I believe. And in this episode, we talked about quality in the last episode. And in this episode, we're talking about what's right and what's wrong about the way coffee is being priced. So this conversation is going to be all about pricing. George, before we started the podcast, I checked what coffee is on the C market, and it is down around the 290. 290.
Watching it on a daily basis. That's right. What anybody in coffee is doing right now.
Right. Now, while that's still high compared to your appearance on the podcast last year, it is low compared to the 420 that we saw about 6 months ago. Now, you having a very successful specialty coffee brand, George Howell Coffee, and having had another brand before that, the Coffee Connection, what are we doing right and wrong about the way that we're pricing coffee? And let's set the context for what we mean by that. We're not talking about roasted coffee. Here we're talking about green coffee. In the next episode, we're going to talk about consumer pricing. So let's just talk about green coffee here.
Okay, well, one, there's 2 different markets, really. There's one based on the C price, and that's bulk coffee. And then there is another one that is specialty, which is not connected to the C price at all, or at least not obviously so,
right?
In any respect, right? I learned a really tough lesson with my second company, George Howell Coffee, when I first opened up with this big cafe restaurant, 4,000 square feet.
Wow.
Back 2003, where I was frankly quite arrogant and had a partnership with a restaurateur and so on. And so this was not just a cafe with the super coffees that I was getting, Cup of Excellence and all of that, but also where we were doing small plates and actually pinchos, bites is what I really wanted. All of that, we were way ahead of our time. It didn't work out. I had to shut it down in the end, bad location. And then I was faced with having a roastery that I had set up for this, and with no cafe. Therefore, I was thrown into, to survive, it was wholesaling. And so I started to wholesale to top-of-the-line restaurants in Boston. That was a shock that took me a long time to get used to. It was hard to get anybody to buy it, and because it was too expensive,
Sure.
right? And the few restaurants that I got, these were top of the line, would do it for 2, 3 months or whatever after we had invested time and energy putting in new machines and everything else and setting them up in the training, and then being told we got a new manager and they don't want to buy your coffee anymore. Goodbye. Overnight, again and again and again. And I don't know about the West Coast in the States or anything else. I know what my experience it was in Boston, and it was top of the line restaurants. What they're serving stops at dessert, and coffee has nothing to do with it at all. Right?
I think that's everywhere around the world.
Right. And so, yeah, I talked to a lot of specialty people, and we all agree that coffee serves the benefit for restaurants is it gets them out the door quickly.
Right.
That's goodbye. And that's remained the case. And so now, but I do have a wholesale business.
Right.
And the wholesale business is entirely different than my retail business. They're radically different, night and day. So with wholesale, 80-90% is a darker roast than what I love, right? But I've learned to respect it. I've learned to respect it and to do a good job with it and with good quality. But it also has to be at a certain price. And that drives you straight to the sea and differentials, right? So, yeah, I'm buying coffees from Costa Rica and other places based on the differential, right? With sources that I've come to really respect and that give me a very basically good quality coffee that's very consistent year to year. So that will vary. And obviously, as the sea goes down, the differential to some degree compensates by going up for that particular quality that I'm paying for. And if the price has gone down too low, like it did in the early 2000s or whatever, the price was held. The differential was raised dramatically in order to keep it at a certain level.
Right.
But that's the way it was. And I don't, when you're dealing with containers after containers after containers, that is a real problem. Should coffee be priced differently? For sure. But the problem is it's like being in the ocean with the tide pulling you straight out into the ocean. Don't try to swim against the current. You're going to drown. You are there. It is a capitalistic world that is happening, and that's how coffee is priced. And little companies like mine have no say in that.
But do you build a different strategy?
To get out, you swim sideways.
Right, exactly.
You look for alternatives.
Right.
So some coffees, some like I buy as large as I can from companies like Dateja, as they say in Brazil, but that's nowhere near enough, right? I'm buying from large farmers at this point.
Right.
I buy from a small farmer for my special coffees at higher price, but I buy for the bulk, right? From really, again, it has to be in containers. That's a whole other world, and I'm dealing in the world that they define, not necessarily that I do. So that's where I'm still evolving, right? So now when I go visit a very large association in Guatemala of very small coffee farmers, many of them indigenous. I am where I do buy that coffee at a pretty high premium differential. But I am now meeting with smaller groups within that to learn. Can I start to talk to a few of them and start to produce within that group a better quality
Right.
or a differentiated quality, and start to sell that for a higher price, right? And for them, right? So they're
Right.
making more and start to build.
So that's more a relationship that you want to build with them so that over
Within
time,
this larger group, and that can spread,
right.
right? But these are ideas that are coming to me now as we go into,
Right.
freaking out about the world and the whole ecological debacle that we're facing, right? So that's one way that I'm looking at it.
Well, and if we connect that to the ecological issues that we're having, if we look at the question we're
Yeah.
asking is what's right and wrong about the way that we're pricing coffee. Can we say that the future of coffee purchasing has to be directly correlated to the ecosystems of which that coffee is being grown in? Do you believe that the future of buying coffee is going to have something to do with that?
Well, coffee's grown in whatever ecological place it is. I mean,
But will the
it
price
changes
be
it
tied
dramatically.
to that, do you think?
The price will be tied, no matter what we do and think, the price is always tied to what consumers prefer at the time. I mean,
For green coffee, though.
I make this coffee is better, but that coffee's more popular. I mean,
Right.
right? And I like two, but I just prefer another. I mean, it's very hard to say, but that all coffee should be I mean, take a look at Panama.
Mm-hmm.
Prices selling for tens of thousands of dollars right now for a pound, right? And going up. Thanks to buyers, by the way, in the Middle East and
Well, and judges
Asia.
at auctions that are scoring them 100 points because that's what their palate prefers, right? Like when judges are scoring
Well,
them
and
that high.
they're right to score them that way. They are that good. They
Right.
are amazing, right? So there's nothing, but that's crazy. I mean, to pay $10,000 for I'm exaggerating, but $1,000, $2,000 a pound for coffee green, when other people selling great coffee are selling it for $5 or $6 a pound, there's a discrepancy, right? A
Let's talk
big
more
one.
about
And
that.
so, question.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, let
Finish.
me just one other thing
Yes,
with
please.
in terms of the bulk issue, right? Which was, and I haven't visited that recently, but I know I was in arguments over this in the early 2000s and later with cooperatives,
Mhm.
right, who can do bulk and quantity. And when I suggested, uh, let's pick out, there are certain people who are craft oriented. You can have 5 people making shoes, and this one guy or woman is making shoes that are far superior to the other 5 and getting the same price for it. But instead of like everybody else saying, I've had it, I'm going to produce the same crap they continue to produce the quality, work like crazy, get the low price because they're driven. I want to reward that person. Okay?
Yeah.
That's what I want to do.
Right.
So that's what drives the quality issue, but also the price.
So
Right?
if I understand you
Is that
correctly,
any person should be paid more because they care more,
and that's a
because they put their
value that,
love into it.
but is that a value that you incorporate into when you as a buyer are buying coffee? Is that an element of quality that registers as a differential, for lack of a better approach, but it's a differential that you feel is worth rewarding?
Of course it is.
Okay, that's it. I think that's
Absolutely.
important for people to understand when it comes
Yeah.
to because I think Tim Wendelbo does the same thing. I can think of a few
I was
different.
going to mention.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, and it's important for people as we go through this year the way that it is, for them to start thinking about how they're pricing coffee. What are they rewarding in that? Some people want to reward the way that the coffee's grown. Others want to reward the way that the coffee is processed and the
Yeah.
fermentation. there's different elements that people want to reward. Some of those things are going to prove to have a long journey. We don't know whether these overly processed and overly fermented coffees are going to have a long path to them or not. But there are some people who want to reward that financially, and there are others who don't want to have a bar of it. And I guess what's important,
I would say they don't want to reward them. They want to take advantage of it or use it.
right?
It's what they can sell because it's pop.
Right. But there are some cultures that like that kind of coffee. You and I don't like drinking it every day.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Oh, well, yeah. In Costa Rica, one of the things I learned right away was with Lamanita's quality and everything else was that people on the farm liked the lowest quality that they were putting out, called consumo. That's what they would and preferred it. Okay. But as people are slowly introduced to things, they start to notice, and they start to climb the ladder of quality as well.
Right. So if we come back to pricing, because you and I will constantly drift towards a conversation around quality. But with regards to pricing, go ahead.
So it's both on the one hand, which I don't. Again, that's very hard to change until you can form relationships with larger farms. So yeah. So the next step would be.
Can I ask you something on that though, if you don't mind?
Yeah. Yeah.
With regards to this bulk buying and the commercial side of things, what do we do about this volatility?
Oh, I know.
Because this volatility can't.
I think that what has to happen is it's hard to define. It's hard for me to figure out because again, I'm in the business and I have to survive.
Right.
One. So I'm getting really top of the line quality, I think, in container loads of, say, Costa Rican coffee.
Right.
I can choose for the containers that I get to pay a standard price regardless of where the sea goes.
Right.
But then I'm in competition with people who are buying the same coffee because I can't buy it all.
Right.
Of the same quality at a lower price and underselling me. So this is a big issue, right, of survival on the one hand. And you can mitigate it somewhat, but you're kind of stuck. But I am playing around with the idea of, fixing the price at a certain level so that it's sustainable economically.
Will your partners be open to that?
I'm very open to that.
Will your partners be open to it though? Your producing partners.
They absolutely. I suspect they would be.
Right.
But it is interesting. I did want to bring up something with co-ops before. It's a little bit off of this.
That's okay. Go ahead.
With co-ops, I'd say that to them, I'm looking for the craftsperson. You've got some craftspeople who are presenting their coffee that's going into your overall blend. I want to separate them. I want to start paying them for their individual coffees. Oh, you can't do that. You can't do that because you're going to decrease our quality. And I'm saying to them, no, I'm going to improve your quality. Because when the other farmers see that this farmer's making more money, they're going to try to produce the same kind of quality. And your overall quality in the co-op will improve, not the other way around as you say it will.
It's similar to what you guys did with Cup of Excellence.
Yes, it's creating models. And you start with small models first, not giant ones, because giant ones are doomed from the start.
Right.
You start with small ones and you prove your point. And then you develop it carefully with ever larger models. That's the way I see it. You cannot go from this small thing to giant right away. It's a formula for failure. Unless you want to make lots of money, right? That's the deal. Fast growth, like you see, so many companies doing that.
Which
Right?
one would
That's a different
argue,
thing.
right? One would argue that we live in an ecosystem, a global business ecosystem that is favoring the big business model versus
Millionaires
us.
and billionaires are the most admired people in our materialistic culture, period.
and famous people.
Yes. Well, they have to be billionaires, please.
All right. There are some coffee Instagram famous people that don't have 2 cents to rub between their fingers, but still are being very revered because they're famous. Let's not open that can of worms. We're going to take the price conversation into the next episode where we're going to talk about the price of roasted coffee and the consumer. Tell me, George, what were you going to say?
20 minutes.
That's like that, super quickly. It really has. So join us for the next episode, folks. We're trying to keep these episodes at 20 minutes, and I assure you that George and I could have each one of these episode conversations for at least 2 hours. But we're trying to be as respectful as possible to your listening time, as much as to the time limit that we've got here. So join us in the next episode where we're going to be talking about this very important thing that everybody's asking right now, which is, should we be passing the price increases that we are experiencing with green coffee onto the consumer? So join us for that. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. This episode is part of a 5-part series produced by Mapper Forward. Check the full playlist and guest details in the show notes, as well as how you can support our work in the coffee industry. Become a premium YouTube subscriber, explore our Patreon and any brands we've partnered with to bring you this podcast. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really does help us grow our audience.